I'm in the temple just for a few months. I'm enjoying myself. I have attachments still outside. I have a young child, a new baby. But the pool of Krishna consciousness is strong enough for me to and my partner wasn't ready for living in a monastic situation or in temple, or she wasn't ready for Krishna consciousness at all. So we decided amicably to. So I was there, just turned 20 years of age, having been in the temple for a couple of months now, and Srila Prabhupada is finally coming. He's finally on his way, the leader of all this, the one behind all this, that's made me give up my life of pleasure seeking, come all the way to London and change my life for a higher purpose. So he's coming, and I'm excited, and everyone's excited. Prabhupada's coming, Prabhupada's coming. And we're running around. So we're at the door, in the doorway, waiting for Prabhupada to arrive. Along he comes in a vehicle, I forget what kind of vehicle he was in, and he steps out and comes straight into the temple. And the first thing that strikes me is he's a lot smaller than I expected. Not necessarily in stature, but I felt that this man has done so much so far. I was expecting a large warrior, I don't know my expectations, but he was small and he smiled, and I'd never seen anything like that smile in my life. He had a wide mouth, he was grinning from ear to ear, and when he opened his mouth, his teeth and his mouth shone like the sun. It was like the sun shining from his mouth. And he looked at us all clearly with love. He loved being with us. And he swept past us with his servants and the others into the temple room. We followed him. He paid his obeisances to Radha Gokulananda, to Radha Landaneshwara. And he came to the back of the temple, climbed up on his Vyasasan, which was quite high up there, but as though he'd done this before. He almost like swanned up onto the Vyasasan, sat down, and looked at us all happily, clearly happy to be in our company. His first words were, "I'm so happy to be here again with you all in London." And he closed his eyes and opened them again and said, "Actually, we are not in London. We are in Vaikuntha. Wherever the holy name of Krishna is chanted, that is Vaikuntha." I felt carried away into the clouds with this pronouncement. I felt safe. I felt you've made the right choice. It's my initiation day. I have two initiation stories. The first initiation is when I received my name from Srila Prabhupada. And this, so far as I can remember, would be about 5 or 6 weeks after I joined the temple. After 5 or 6 weeks, I was sitting before Srila Prabhupada being initiated. I was reluctant at first, but I had a friend, an older devotee, one of the first English devotees, Kulashekar was his name. And Kulashekar had taken to me, so we were close friends. He liked me a lot, and he was always encouraging me in my service. So there was going to be an initiation ceremony. And he said, "Kishor." No, he didn't. He said, "Pat." He said, "Pat, you should take initiation. You might not get another opportunity like this." I said, "But I've only been around for a month or so. I don't know yet. I'm not quite sure." He said, "You should take the opportunity. It might not happen again." And somehow or other, he encouraged me to take initiation. So, however, there I was before Srila Prabhupada after 5 or 6 weeks of having been in the temple. And I'm hoping that Prabhupada doesn't give me a long, complicated name that I can never remember, you know, because there had been a few already, and I was hoping for something simple. And I was bearing in mind my godbrother, Ronchor. I liked that name. That was simple. It's just 2 syllables, Ronchor. It sounded sweet and easy to remember. That's all I remember. I just hope that I can remember the name that Prabhupada gives me. So when it comes my turn, and the initiate before me was a girl who Prabhupada named Kishori. That was her name, Kishori. And so off she went with her beads, and then it was my turn. And I was praying that I'd be able to remember the 4 regulative principles, because I knew Prabhupada was going to ask me about the 4 regulative principles. So fortunately, somehow I stumbled through the 4 regulative principles, and then he gave me my beads and said, and your name is Kishor. And he gave me my beads, and he looked in my eyes and said, you know what is the meaning of Kishor? I said, no. So he looked at me and said, Kishor means adolescent Krishna. When he used to woo the gopis, like that. Then, but you are not Kishor. You are Kishor Das. And off I went with my smile on my face and my beads, clutching my beads, and my name, which I could remember. And Prabhupada had even explained what it meant. I felt so happy and relieved that it was all over. And I'd remembered the 4 regulative principles, and I was somehow on board, somehow or other. At the second initiation, here's the other initiation story. It was time, this would be about a year later, about 12 months or so later. Again, we're in Berry Place, and again, Prabhupada is awarding second initiation to some of the devotees, and I was included in the group. As it was, we weren't expecting the initiations to come until later in the day. So I'd been doing some service, and I was running around the temple, not necessarily prepared, but somehow something had happened and Prabhupada's schedule changed, and he had to leave to go on some preaching, to visit some life member or to go away. So the initiation was brought forward by about half a day, and someone came and said, Kishor, Kishor, it's time, you have to go now to get your initiation. But I said, but I'm not ready, I haven't prepared, I think I had time quickly to have a quick shower, or maybe even just splash my face, and I don't even think I had time for a shower. So I did my best, put on a fresh dhoti, and rushed up the stairs. And almost immediately, I was ushered into Prabhupada's room, upstairs. Put some tilak on quickly. And the room was semi-dark. And Prabhupada's servant was massaging, I forget, it might have been Aravinda, possibly Aravinda. I don't know if it was Shrutakirti, but I think it was Aravinda at the time, can't remember. But it was just Prabhupada in his gamsha with this radiance coming off his body. You could see the oil and the radiance. So I was ushered into the room, and Prabhupada was at the other end of the room, the other side of the room. And I stepped inside, and Prabhupada immediately looked in my direction, and he said, you have bathed today? I'd barely even come into the room. And I said, yes, Prabhupada. I didn't want to go through the whole explanation or whatever. It would have just sounded so... I said, yes, Prabhupada. And he looked at me and said, there is odor coming. And I thought, I've blown it. I'll have to wait till some other Prabhupada's going to kick me out. There's odor coming. And he was way at the other end of the room. And he looked at me and said, come. And I sat down. And he said softly, Brahman means clean. Brahman must bathe 3 times daily. And then rather than say that, he said, come. And then he proceeded to give me Brahman initiation. I was astonished. How was it possible for him to, I just walked in. So that was my lesson, that if I want to be Brahman, then you be clean. Srila Prabhupada has just installed Radha Gokulananda at the Bhaktivedanta Manor is August 1973. He's just installed the deities, and the following day is his appearance day. It's called Vyasa Puja. And Prabhupada has just given a lecture, a talk from the Vyasa-san, and it's time for questions. The temple room is packed. It's a joyous occasion. We've been waiting for this moment for a couple of years now, since Berry Place in London was overcrowded. We looked for a new place, and with George Harrison's help, we found this beautiful manor. And Prabhupada has just installed the deities, Radha Gokulananda, and the day after, he's sitting on the Vyasa-san, and we're celebrating his appearance day, Vyasa Puja. And it's time for questions and answers. So there are some questions and answers. I don't necessarily remember the detail, but then the devotee beside me, he puts up his hand and he says, Srila Prabhupada, is it possible for a pure devotee to ever forget Krishna? Prabhupada looks at Radha Gokulananda and closes his eyes like this for a moment. He opens them again and looks at the devotee next to me and says very slowly, every day I pray to Krishna, please don't let me fall down. And my heart almost leapt out of me. Here's my master. I don't know anything about his stature really. I'm still a young boy running around doing service. And here's my master, my spiritual master. And he is honestly declaring that every day he prays to Krishna, please don't let me fall down. So I'm thinking, it can happen to anyone. If it can happen to Prabhupada, it can surely happen to me. So I'd better pull my socks up and get serious. We're at the Bhaktivedanta Manor in 1973. And I'm in Prabhupada's room, his darshan room, which is upstairs. It's a beautiful big room, large room, and it's packed. And today, so far as I can remember, it's full of people from different religious denominations. At that time, Shyam Sundar had been inviting different people to come in and meet with Prabhupada. And today it was the interfaith almost, you know. So leaders of different spiritual denominations, religious denominations had come to see who is this person, who is this Swami, the leader of this Hare Krishna group. So it was full of devotees and all these people. And Prabhupada was speaking away, explaining Krishna consciousness. And I'm standing somehow or other just next to Prabhupada, possibly because there's nowhere else to sit. And I've moved to the only place left, and it happens to be just behind Prabhupada. Now, the door slowly opens, and in walks a little 5-year-old boy, Premananda, who happens to be my stepson. I've recently married, and so he's my little stepson. And little Premananda happens to be dressed from head to toe in a sannyasi outfit with a little danda. And I think, what's his mother doing? What is she thinking about? And Prabhupada stops speaking and looks over, and his face turns into a smile from ear to ear. He says, Maharaj, like this, and his eyes open wide like this. He says, welcome, come. So little Premananda, somehow or other, he starts to clamber over all the people sitting in the room. He's just literally climbing over people to come forward to sit before Srila Prabhupada, who's at his table, and Prabhupada's just beaming at him, as though here comes the sannyasi from his travels, he's returned. And so he sits before Prabhupada, and Prabhupada's just smiling and addressing him, Maharaj. What is your name? Premananda. Premananda Maharaj. He says, take. And he offers him a sweet from there's a tray of sweet balls on the table. And so Premananda, he's sitting there, he puts one, and Prabhupada's just enjoying watching him eating the sweet and the sannyasi with the danda. I think he took another one, a second one as well, and Prabhupada's just enjoying seeing Premananda. And then he continues to address. Now the first thing I remember about all this is that when Prabhupada saw Premananda, his whole countenance changed. He was serious and stern one moment, and when Premananda walked into the room, Prabhupada almost became as a child, as Premananda. It was like two children in the moment. I could literally see a change. Prabhupada transformed into a child and then again transformed into the spiritual master and continued explaining to his audience about Krishna consciousness. And Premananda just sat there for the rest of the... And Srila Prabhupada was finished with him now, and he was back to being serious and preaching Krishna consciousness. Now that's almost the first part of this story, because part two of this particular story comes the next morning. The next morning, downstairs during the morning program. And Prabhupada's on his morning walk. And I'm downstairs keeping my eye on Premananda, who by this time is behaving a little bit differently. Now he's running around, playing with his friends, and charging around, using his danda as a weapon, and beating people with it, and chasing around, and the kids are having a great time. I look around, and there is Srila Prabhupada standing in the corner, looking at this scene, not looking happy. He's very grave indeed, and I can feel it. My heart goes, And he says quietly to the person next to him, "Who is the father?" Oh. So I walk forward. I'm the father, Srila Prabhupada. So I'm standing right before Srila Prabhupada like this, and he looks right into my eyes, and he's very grave and very serious. And he says, he shouldn't dress like this anymore. Sannyas is very serious business. And he walks off, that's all. He wasn't having any fun with Premananda this time, at all. And I thought, what a difference from one evening to this morning. Same boy, same spiritual master, different message. It was profound, that one. I was learning that this man, this person is unpredictable. I've no idea how he's going to be from moment to moment, and yet, like no one I'd ever seen before or met before, had this, like a chameleon, able to change according to the circumstances. He had a very profound message to deliver, and he wanted me to be very aware of that. I wasn't particularly aspiring to become a sannyasi. It hadn't even entered my mind. But at the same time, the message was that sannyas is very serious business. He had told me so. But Prabhupada was unpredictable, I found. That's why I loved him so much. I didn't know what to expect. One day I'm fortunately on a morning walk with Srila Prabhupada, and it's at Regent's Park in London. This would be in 71 or 72. And we're in Regent's Park in London, and I've always held back during the morning walks. I've been at the back. Prabhupada's always had sannyasis or older godbrothers with him, so I've always been happy to stay in the back, out of sight. Almost hoping Prabhupada wouldn't even notice me. That's how I felt. You know, I just wanted to stay as far away as possible, and so on and so forth. But before I joined, I had one poster of Krishna. It was a favorite poster of mine. Krishna playing his flute in Vrindavan with the river Jamuna, a little waterfall, and underneath the image was the name Murli Manohar. So I always wondered what this meant. And none of the devotees had really been able to tell me. So somehow or other, I found myself next to Prabhupada. I don't quite know how it happened, but there I was. And before thinking too much about it, I opened my mouth and said, Srila Prabhupada, one of Krishna's names is Murli Manohar. Could you tell us what this means? And he immediately looked at me and smiled like this. And closed his eyes and opened them again and said, Murli means flute. And Manohar means beautiful. So, when Krishna takes his flute, he is even more beautiful. He smiles like this and walks on. And I thought, he liked the question. And I just felt, I'm even more connected with this movement now. Krishna becomes even more beautiful when he takes his flute. I'm sitting on the lawn with a group of devotees, and it's 1973 again. Prabhupada spent some time in London at the manor, several months. It was the summertime, and so often he'd go on the lawn and sit with the devotees, chanting japa and just talking. Most of those occasions I would be busy doing service or Sankirtan or whatever, and I didn't really feel that I wanted to just sit with Prabhupada for the sake of sitting with Prabhupada. I had a feeling that he might not approve necessarily. And I thought, well, the ones that do get to sit with him, then they're more qualified, or that's their good karma, or whatever. But I didn't. But on one occasion I was on the lawn with Prabhupada, and it was a weekend. Now, just not far away from the manor is an airfield, and people come and just fly their little planes for hobby. They're hobbies. They just have their, and those little planes, they make a little noise. You know, you can bzzz, you hear them. And so this was a summer weekend, so it was busy, and lots of these people were up there with their little planes. So I could see we were listening to Srila Prabhupada speak, but all these little planes were a distraction. They were becoming a distraction. I could see myself in particular, and a few of the other devotees were looking up like this and just almost mouthing, I wish they'd go away, we can't hear properly, this and that. And I noticed that Prabhupada picked up on this. Prabhupada was looking around at us all, looking up in the sky at these little planes. And so he looked up like this too. And again, he smiled from ear to ear as he watched all these little planes buzzing around. And then he looked around at us and he said, they will be mosquitoes. And that's all he had to say. Then he continued to speak. They will be mosquitoes. As though, don't worry about them. Don't be distracted. Focus. They will be mosquitoes. Fascinating. I'm sitting in Srila Prabhupada's room in Berry Place. It's a very small room on the first floor. And again, it's packed out with various people, visitors, devotees, standing room only. And Prabhupada sitting, speaking behind his desk. And then just below the window, outside, comes the sound of a pair of car towels clashing onto the pavement, onto the sidewalk. There's a little group of devotees, they're preparing to go chanting, a chanting party. And one of them drops the car towels. So Prabhupada stops speaking, looks towards where the noise is coming from and rises up from behind his desk. He walks over to the window and looks out the window to see the devotees getting ready to go on Sankirtan. And he comes back and sits down and looks at us all lovingly and just says, Lord Chaitanya will personally protect them. And again, I had that feeling that I'm in the right place. Actually, it was Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. He said, Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu will personally protect them. I don't know if you want me to. I think it's important that thing, it was the whole Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu will personally protect them. But it just looked so affectionate. It was the affection with which Prabhupada said it. I just felt, yes. I think that's what nailed it for me, was feeling loved. Because I hadn't really felt that up until Prabhupada came into my life. I felt loved no matter what. I was a nonsense, but you're loved, and I want you here. Yeah. The year's 1972, and we were in a hall in Glasgow, in Scotland, which is where I was born. The place I left when I was 17 because it was so heavy, it was rough, it was violent. I'm sure it had other qualities as well, of course, but as a little child, adolescent, early teenage kid, I wanted to get away from that place. I didn't enjoy my life in Glasgow as a child. Shortly after becoming a devotee and joining the Hare Krishna movement, Prabhupada's mission, we managed to organize a program for Prabhupada to speak at. He came very briefly to Scotland for 2 days. He came to Edinburgh, spent the night in Edinburgh, and the next day, and then in the afternoon, he came over to Glasgow. We'd hired a big hall, and it was pretty full. It was a good turnout. We'd hired the hall in Maryhill in Glasgow, which is well known as one of the roughest parts of what was then a very rough city. The reason we'd hired the hall there was, though, is there was a big Asian community in that part of Glasgow, and also there was a university. So we thought that could bring a big audience, hopefully a big audience of students, youngsters, and also Asians, Indian-bodied audience. And we were right. It was a good turnout, and a couple of things happened which I'll never forget. Apart from the fact that Prabhupada gave a very solid talk on Bhagavad-gita, he spoke about fighting, he spoke about warfare, and he spoke about duty. I had my apprehensions. I thought, people here have had enough of all that. Maybe he could be speaking more flowery, more like the peace and love Swami, the sweetness and light. But no, Prabhupada gave a very forceful lecture, which was very well received, contrary to what I was thinking. It was very well received, and the audience were applauding heartily, and it came to questions and answers. Prabhupada answered a few. There were a few questions and answers, and what I remember is that then came this hippie character, long-haired, with a bearded, and he didn't sound very happy at all. And he was raving away from the back of the hall, shouting, whatever, we couldn't really understand. And Prabhupada looked to his servant, or his assistant, whoever he was, and he said, I cannot hear, can you ask him to come forward? So whoever it was, Ribhadanandan Swami, I think, possibly, invited this person to come down to the front so that he could express himself and what he wanted to say to Prabhupada. So he came all the way from the back of the hall, all the time just ranting and shouting, you're not God, or we're all God, or I'm God. Why should I surrender to someone if I'm already God? Or whatever it was, whether he was stoned or drunk, or if it was just the way he wasn't very happy. And he was right down below the stage, continuing to give off all this tirades and stuff. And Prabhupada just sat there listening, quietly. And eventually he finished. And Prabhupada said, so, you're finished now? And he looked at Prabhupada and said, yes, And so there was silence. And then Prabhupada said into the microphone, pretty quietly, but everyone could hear, he said, "You are not God, you are dog." And everyone began to cheer and applaud. It was relief. Almost like Prabhupada had switched a relief valve. There was tension and now there was relief. But that wasn't all. Prabhupada kindly engaged with him in some exchange. He then went on to ask him, "Do you know what is God?" And the guy said, "I think so, sometimes." He said, "Yes." He said, God, Prabhupada said, God means controller. Are you controller? And he looked at Prabhupada and said, "Well, sometimes." And Prabhupada said, "Yes, sometimes. In the office, you are controller. At home, you are controlled. But God is always controller. When you come across that person who is in absolute control, that is God." So he gave this person some time and some understanding. Then he just turned around and walked all the way back to the back of the hall. He seemed satisfied and the audience was applauding. So whether he felt embarrassed or whether, well, I've had said my piece and I've had my response, it was the way Prabhupada handled that, though, that I thought was just incredible. First of all, he said, "You're not God, you are dog." So that could have been just a dismissal. But then Prabhupada explained to him what God meant. At that same venue, when the questions and answers were over, Prabhupada said, "Kirtan." So the devotees, led by Rabbanandan, had a big kirtan on the stage. And so everyone was dancing, chanting, and they opened all the doors to the hall. So in from the streets came a lot of these little street kids, because remember, we're in a real rough part of Glasgow. And so some real rough little kids, raggedy clothes and looking to cause some trouble, came in to find out what was going on in this place after the doors opened. And some of them made their way down to the stage, and some of them began to chant like this, you know, making some fun, having a laugh with the weird Hare Krishnas like this. And so some of the devotees, myself included, thought it would be best to get these guys off the stage. They're being offensive or something. We can't have these kids on this stage. They don't know what this is all about. So Rabbanandan, again, I was behind Prabhupada. Somehow I was just, because I just liked being as close to Prabhupada as I could get, which wasn't very often. So I was just, so Rabbanandan, he came up to Prabhupada and said, "Prabhupada, should we get these children off the stage?" Prabhupada said, "No, let them dance. They are devotees." And again, my heart went into my mouth, because I thought, it's the way he said it. I thought, Prabhupada sees devotees. And we see a bunch of kids we want to kick off the stage and get them back out the door where they came from. Prabhupada saw devotees. I felt that. I didn't understand it, but I thought, that's how he sees. They're devotees. And he was quite firm. "No," he said, "let them dance. They are devotees." So I felt happy that I'd brought Prabhupada to this place that I'd left also. I was quite proud and honored. I felt I was giving something back to that town of my birth. Giving something back. Here's a pure devotee of Krishna. In return for what I got from you, you have a pure devotee of Krishna and get his mercy. So Prabhupada was very well received that day. It was very successful. Prabhupada was so happy. I think we only had little bits of oranges to give out as we had no money really. We were very poor, so no one had certainly been able to come up with any feast. So we gave out slices of orange to everyone as prasadam. and Prabhupada was giving it out by hand to people also. And I can remember when he left the stage to leave, he rubbed Tribhuvanath's head. It was Tribhuvanath Prabhu who had organized all this. He rubbed him on the head and said, "Thank you very much for this." So he enjoyed that. And he told me later in a letter, he said that, "I liked that place, Scotland, very much. And presently we're looking for a new temple, which became Bhaktivedanta Manor. We hadn't. And hopefully when I come back to England, then I will be able to come back to Scotland again." He said, "But I could not bear the cold, even in August." When Prabhupada came to Edinburgh, he gave a welcome address. He swept up the stairs, into the temple room, onto his Vyasasan, and there were a lot of people had arrived to find out who is this leader of this still new Hare Krishna movement, certainly new in Scotland. The people of Scotland were quite aghast and shocked by this new movement. They couldn't figure it out, they couldn't quite make out. It's a very Presbyterian and religious country with a lot of Christian history behind it. At the same time, there were a lot of different Eastern groups springing up. Transcendental Meditation, the Guru Maharaj Ji. Now, the Guru Maharaj Ji, the Divine Light Mission, had their ashram across the road. And they had a big poster of their guru, the Guru Maharaj Ji, staring at us just across the street. It was funny, kind of a little competition going on there. But I noticed that a lot of their followers had come across the road to hear Prabhupada speak. And I also noticed that most of them brought something to offer, a piece of fruit or pints of milk or just something to put next to the altar, out of respect. So Prabhupada spoke, and then at the end of his address said, "Are there any questions?" And one of the premis, I think they're called, the followers of the Guru Maharaj, he put his hand up and he said, "Swami, why must God be philosophy?" And Prabhupada looked straight back at him and said, very quietly, "Krishna is God, and God is great. Philosophy means to know how God is great." And that's all. He said it slowly, clearly, and the person who asked the question, he was happy, he played his pranams and sat down again. But I felt that it was like a thunderbolt, and yet very quiet and clear. Because their philosophy is that if you do something, you go into the light, some mechanical way of just disappearing into some light, becoming one. So he wanted to know, why must God be philosophy? It was a little bit aggressive, but Prabhupada silenced him, and he was happy. One other time in Edinburgh, again, Prabhupada was just preparing to leave for Glasgow, for his talk in Glasgow. But I think it was Shyam Sundar Prabhu had organized a little press conference. So there were a few journalists that arrived to interview Prabhupada. Not very many, maybe 5 or 6. And it seemed to me that they weren't all that interested, as though these journalists had been, they'd drawn the short straw of their newspaper, had just sent them along to this temple to interview the Swami, their leader, whoever he was. It doesn't look as though they were all that interested. But they came with their notebooks and pens and pencils and all that, and they sat around this little makeshift table that we'd put together, hastily. And Prabhupada sat at the top of the table, and these journalists all sat looking at Prabhupada and looking at each other, and they didn't seem to know what to say. So it was very silent for a press conference. They asked questions about, what's this on your forehead, and so on and so forth. In fact, one of them asked a question that Prabhupada said, "What newspaper are you from?" And he said, from the observer. And Prabhupada said, so why haven't you observed? Why don't you know these things? In response to the obvious questions, the shaved heads, the tilak, that was his. So Prabhupada started making the conversation, rather than the journalists using the time to find out about this. Prabhupada said, so, this Edinburgh is called Festival City. Every year, thousands of tourists. Yes, yes, Swami. And you have 2 universities, not only 1, but 2 universities. A very prestigious city you have. Yes, yes. And so he's got them, softening them up, sweetening them up almost. But they were still not engaging. So then Prabhupada dropped the bombshell. He said, so, why your children are all becoming hippies and taking LSD? And this was like a bombshell, because they didn't know what to say to this comment. The last thing they were expecting from this peaceful guru type Swami figure. And 1 or 2 of them got up and left. They were affronted. They felt, oh, how can you speak like this? And the press conference didn't last all that much longer. There were a few small inquiries, questions, as though that was what they were meant to be doing. But they didn't show enough interest. And they were from the lower end of the newspaper world, the tabloid, the Sun, the Mirror, the Daily Record, not the broadsheets or the higher class paper. So yeah. So it shocked me when he said that about the children. Why are your children becoming hippies and taking LSD? You've got such a nice city here, everything, 2 universities, all these tourists. He also commented that these people, they're very proud of their buildings. The people of Edinburgh. From a morning walk, he came back from a morning walk, because it is a very beautiful city. If you've been to Edinburgh, it's a very beautiful, beautiful Georgian and buildings and so forth, and all that. I was always astonished at how relaxed Prabhupada seemed, no matter where he was. I can remember him even lecturing in a big hall, again in London, and he was relaxed. Wherever he was, one of my major experiences of Srila Prabhupada was that he was unfazed, relaxed, absolutely knew that Krishna was guiding him at every moment.
Je anilo premadana Karuna prachu